There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second thematic webinar on the Efficiency for Access Design Challenge year 2023 to 2024. And today we'll be discussing designing for humanitarian contexts, especially within the challenge and understanding how to go about that. So as a bit of housekeeping before we begin, the session will be recorded, as you can see, and we'll also enable the transcript so that you can see that as well. Let me just enable that for all of you. Okay, so that will be recorded as well. And as usual, the session, the recording, and the slides will be made available on CrowdSolve after the event. If you go onto the forum, find the event space, and find the post related to this, it'll be just at the bottom of there. That's the same with all the recordings. So if you're ever looking for it in post, you can find it there. So if you would not like to be recorded today, please feel free to turn off your video and mute yourself. But we will have a Q&A section at the end, and I hope you can all come off mute and turn on your videos for that. If you don't feel comfortable with that, feel free to send in your questions over the chat, and you can do that through the whole session. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Rachel Kura, and she will be kind of monitoring that chat and keeping track of all of you. So if you need any help throughout the session, just reach out to her. She'll be there to help you out. Okay, so can you all see my screen? I hope you can. That's our cover slide, but this is the agenda. So I will be going briefly over the relevance of today's session for the challenge so that you all have a bit of framing around how you can apply this learning. We'll meet our speakers, Liya and Philip. We'll introduce you to in a bit, but you can see on your screens now. And then they'll both do their presentations. And finally, we'll have a Q&A, which we hope takes up most of the session. So as for relevance to the assessment framework, so humanitarian contexts kind of have relevance to everything because that's the first decision you make on the challenge, and choosing your context very carefully and considering that throughout the design process is very important. But if I had to choose one, it would be how well have you considered the people who are using your design in your design under social impact? How well have you understood their needs? So that's really core to this context section of the design process, and when you're choosing this for your concept note that you're all doing right now. So the relevance to the challenge. So first and foremost, you might have seen this in the challenge brief as well under the context section, but the first step for all of you is to choose a problem statement, and within that, choose the context that you're designing for. So we gave the example this year of a humanitarian context because we think that this is a setting that will be really, it will give you a lot of space to innovate, and it will also have, there's a lot of room for improvement, and there's a lot of need in this space. So I think it's important for all of you to kind of consider this first and foremost as an option for all of you. It's also a brilliant way to meet the challenge brief. There is plenty of room to kind of improve the quality of life of in homes or the productivity of businesses within humanitarian contexts. And there's, I think, as Liya and Philip will show you later, there's plenty of room to innovate within this space. As for resources, so there's a bunch of resources within the challenge brief around humanitarian contexts and where you can pull great information from. But I just wanted to highlight a few here, especially for anyone looking at the slides and the recording in post. This will all be shared with you. But we have the challenge brief, our webinar last year that Philip spoke on, State of Humanitarian Energy Sector, made by UNITAR, which is where Philip works. So we have a real expert here today. Energy Solutions for Displacement Settings by GIZ, User-Centered Design and Humanitarian Energy Projects by Energypedia, and Renewables for Refugee Settlements by IRENA. If our speakers have any additional resources today, I'll also share those in post, and they'll be found on the CrowdSolve post at the bottom. So you can look out for that there. So I hope that gives a bit of framing for today's webinar. This is kind of your first step, your first decision making on the challenge. And I hope this kind of like sheds some light, not only on humanitarian context, but kind of other considerations that you can make when choosing a context at the concept note stage. So I think that closes up my section. And Rachel, do you want to introduce our speakers for today?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, we're really delighted to have Dr. Philip Sandwell and Liya with us today. So Dr. Philip Sandwell is a research associate at the GPA coordination unit at UNITAR, providing support on data analysis, research, sustainable energy policymaking in situations of displacement. So his responsibilities include assessing energy access for households, businesses, and community facilities in displacement settings, and quantifying the cost and GHG emission savings from decarbonising the humanitarian response via sustainable energy solutions. So prior to joining the GPA coordination unit, Philip was a postdoctoral researcher at Imperial College London, where his work focused on techno-economic modelling of solar mini grids in rural areas of developing countries and refugee camps. So welcome, Philip. And Liya Bensy Thomas is a seasoned researcher with over 5 years extensive research experience in climate change and sustainability. Liya is a trained ethnographic researcher and has adeptly contributed her expertise to various impactful research initiatives. Her current focus is around shaping and executing research projects within the Low Energy Inclusive Appliances Programme at Energy Saving Trust. And Liya has dual master's degrees, one in international development, environment, climate change and sustainability, and another in natural resource governance. So welcome, Liya. And I'm going to hand over to Liya now to present her presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, hi everyone. So as Rachel said, I'm Liya Bensy Thomas. I'm a senior project manager with Energy Saving Trust, and I work on research projects under Efficiency for Access. And today I'll be sharing insights and learnings we gained from a research we conducted with appliance companies in the humanitarian setting. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. So we conducted this research in April 2023. And what we wanted to do with research was to understand the type of companies that are serving the humanitarian energy sector, the type of appliances that are in demand, what are the kind of business models that worked for them, what are the challenges they faced. And we focused specifically on appliances other than lighting and cooking. So we focused on refrigerators, televisions, radios, solar water pumps, solar mills, electronic mobility, walk-in cold rooms, and so on. We distributed the survey with around 80 to 100 companies, and we got responses from around 21. And we also followed it up with one-to-one interviews with few of these companies. Next slide, please. So in terms of insights, the first thing was among the surveyed companies, the most popular appliances were televisions and radios. These are smaller appliances, and one of the main things was because it was more affordable for people in these settings. And also it is useful to gain information, especially latest information on weather updates, about droughts, or about rainfall, or any political updates. And also some people also said that it brings about a sense of community, because after a long days of work, people like to gather around television or radio and meet and talk and discuss the day. On the other hand, there was limited supply of larger appliances like refrigerators or solar water pumps and mills. And this, based on the surveyed companies, is because of the high upfront cost. So for example, when you have to pay around $20 for a radio, you have to pay more than $150 for a refrigerator or any of the larger appliances. And the other thing that was shared by the companies were that people in the displaced content have limited technical knowledge and awareness. So they do not necessarily have the training to operate some of these complicated appliances. Next slide, please. So for example, this was shared by a company that supplied solar mills in Kalobai Integrated Settlement. And it was supplied to an already established micro enterprise. And the unit that they supplied was damaged beyond repair within 2 months. So there was a foreign object in the sieve and they could not repair it locally. So it had to be brought back to the factory. So from this, what you have to think is that when you're designing something for displacement settings, your design or solution has to be durable. It has to be easy for people to use with no technical training. And it should be locally repairable to avoid back and forth about getting your unit back to the factory. So develop a robust design that can withstand harsh conditions and that can require minimal maintenance. Next slide, please. So from the research, we identified few structural challenges. One is around affordability constraints. So people in many displacement settings have limited access to formal financial services like credits or loans. Similarly, income sources are limited. People often rely on cash-based transfers or remittances from people outside the camp. Some of them have businesses, but even then consider that income sources are limited. So consider this when you're designing. Consider the affordability constraints in your design. Next is around many of the humanitarian situations are located in remote areas, have poor communication and infrastructure. So it can get tricky to provide after sales service. So always consider something that can be repaired locally with locally available tools and resources by a local technician. So avoid developing something that's very complicated for people to use. Other thing is around low customer awareness. So people might not always know how to efficiently use a resource. So for example, refrigerator, how to economically use or energy efficiently use. So in your design, consider either maybe a pictorial user guideline on how to use these resources and make the displays or whatever you're having very easy to understand for a layman. And as a designer, something that you might face when you're thinking about developing something for humanitarian setting is that there is limited data available on the user preference or energy requirements in humanitarian setting. So you might not always find secondary data easily available. So instead, you can talk to people who have worked in this setting. You can talk to companies or individuals who you know are familiar with the setting and collect data from them and see if your design is going to be helpful for people in the setting or is it going to be a burden for them. Next slide, please. So while I have shared a lot of challenges, do not be disheartened that no, this is a difficult area to work. Think about these challenges as an opportunity for you to address. So a challenge that you might consider. So it could be affordability or it could be the low transport, low infrastructure. Think of these challenges as an opportunity. Your design could empower individuals and communities to rebuild their lives. It could be a sustainable solution that will enable communities to thrive in these challenges. So I'll leave and end it with a note here that this was shared by a manufacturer that supplied appliances in Carlo by Integrated Settlement, who said that the opportunity for our technology to create livelihood impact in humanitarian context is disproportionately high compared to rural and peri-urban customers. So do consider that when you're developing your design. Thank you.
Thanks, Liya. And Liya joined us today feeling quite sick, so her throat's not doing so well. So thank you for powering through for that. And I think everything you presented is really applicable for all the students here. So hopefully you can take some of that away for your own design process. I think, yeah, thanks for being direct and letting everyone know how they can kind of approach this. I just wanted to break up a little bit of the talking. I just wanted to set a poll up before we introduce Philip with his presentation. And ask if people are considering at the moment looking into humanitarian contexts for their design this year. And yeah, well, I think we'll see that we'll check in on this again at the end of the presentation today, but good to hear where you're all sitting at today. And Philip, I think, is moving house, so he's also joining us under kind of duress. So thanks for joining today, even though I'm sure it's a very busy time.
Yeah, no, you are correct. It's a bit of a stressful time, but no, I'm very happy to be here. Like specifically made time for this because this is really important. So like, yeah, honestly, I'm really glad to be here. And yeah, great to hear from you, Liya. Like great stuff. You're giving a great overview. You've done half my job already, so thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, I see we have a few responses. Got some yeses, got some nos. If you see the survey on your page, feel free to respond. But if you've already finished, just click done, and I think it should disappear for you. I'm going to close it in 1 minute just so we can get Philip underway. While Philip is presenting today, feel free to send in your questions in advance, and we can kind of build those up and get ready for the Q&A later. Send them in the chat. But if you prefer to do it on the mic, just raise your hand when the time comes. Equally, if you're watching the recording today, please feel free to send any questions you might have over email. I'll try to respond to them and get your response to those. If I can't answer them, maybe I'll reach out to Philip and Liya. Maybe they'll be kind enough to respond to those. Okay, so let me close that poll. Seems like people are here today because you're interested in humanitarian contexts, and you're attending today's session because you're looking for some information. So that's good to know. A couple of you are not thinking of so, but maybe that'll change by the end of today's presentation. Okay, let me close that poll. Pass it off to you, Philip.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sean. Let's see if we can turn some of those no's into, well, at least a maybe. Yeah, so hi, everyone. As I was kindly introduced, my name's Phil Sandwell. I work for an organization called UNITAR, which is part of the UN system, and we focus specifically on sustainable energy in displacement settings. So if you can actually skip through 2 slides, I think you don't need the next one up. Yeah, there we go. So I just want to start off by giving the scale of the challenge that we're talking about. So I think at last count, there was more than 100 million people around the world that are affected by displacement in different forms. This could be refugees, this could be internally displaced people, or anyone kind of affected by conflict or other reasons they need to move from one place to another. We try and be very inclusive when we talk about humanitarian contexts or displacement contexts. This could be the traditional image that many people have, which is like a refugee camp, which might be in a rural area of a developing country, but would also include people that have been displaced, for example, in conflict in Ukraine and are now living in cities, or any other kind of issues there. The kind of the focus that I'll do today is mostly on the kind of refugee camp context. This is also, I think, what Liya was talking about mostly as well, just as an example, but just to say this does kind of broaden out quite far. If we look at, excuse me, if we look at just the refugee or the displaced people living in camp settings, the level of energy access there is incredibly low. So the way we normally break this down, as I'm sure you're familiar, is in terms of clean cooking and in terms of electricity access. And if we look at the comparison between 2014 and 2020, which was the last time kind of major worldwide study was done, the situation, if anything, has gotten a bit worse in that more people are relying on the most basic forms of cooking, and pretty much everyone does not have access to reliable electricity or has access to only the most basic sources. So the latest numbers we have is that about 4 out of 5 people rely on basic cooking sources, and what is that, 95%? So that's what 19 out of every 20 people have no access to reliable power. Obviously, this is a huge issue, and I guess the reason why you're joining today is because you want to do something about it. Let's look at a few more of the challenges first. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So one of the biggest issues we see in displacement contexts is the need for cooking. So the traditional forms of cooking is normally based around firewood or other kinds of biomass, maybe charcoal. People are often living in very densely populated areas. To summarize, this is absolutely terrible for human health. If you're next to a stove while you're cooking this every day, it causes intense issues with your lungs. And speaking very realistically, this issue predominantly affects women and girls, especially in these kind of contexts. So at the GPA, what we try and advocate for is clean cooking solutions, especially around things like electric cooking or anything that can reduce this kind of indoor air pollution, because it has such a negative impact on people's health. Next slide, please. The other thing it has a huge impact on is the local environment. So these pictures here were taken by some colleagues in one of the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. You can see across those 3 pictures there's a huge impact on the natural environment. So as people need firewood for cooking, like this is a clear need, people can't go without cooking. Unfortunately, it has a huge impact on the forest areas around this camp. You can see in that middle picture in 2018 that the biomass resource has been completely exhausted. This has knock-on issues in terms of like biodiversity, the impacts on wildlife. For example, this is a big elephant hosting area. And then you have issues around flooding, landslides because the tree roots don't keep the mud in place, all sorts of other environmental issues that essentially stem from this one energy access issue. Next slide, please. If we kind of move into like a different sector, when we talk about like social institutions, hospitals, these kind of essential services that happen in displacement contexts, of course, people still get sick in these kind of areas. They need medical attention. Imagine going to a hospital that didn't have access to electricity and the kind of service you would receive there. Of course, all of these different appliances that doctors or medical staff will need require electricity. They require very reliable electricity. And most of the time in these kind of contexts, they're powered by diesel generators, which is up in the top right, which is generally incredibly polluting. It's pretty much the worst source of electricity in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that you could make. But for many reasons, is the kind of predominant electricity source in these kind of contexts. So anything that can reduce the reliance on these diesel generators, especially if it's a more efficient appliance for some kind of medical applications, could really help reduce that kind of environmental impact from generators. Next, please. The other side of things is in other kinds of social institutions like schools. This is a very a very old classroom on the left, and then a much more recent one on the right, and you can see the difference is almost literally night and day in when you have access to these other like new kinds of appliances for educational purposes. It vastly improves the quality of education that people can receive. So the example here is that these kids have now got access to tablets. There'll also be kind of Wi-Fi connectivity in that school, which wouldn't have happened otherwise, which means you can access all sorts of learning resources that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. The budget for schools, especially in displacement contexts, is particularly low. So anything that can use less energy and especially more cost effective, so less costly as well, would have a huge impact on people's education. Next, please. There's lots of other kind of challenges that we have in displacement contexts. The example here is something with good intentions. So these are solar streetlights. You can see the solar panels on top of these poles. There's little battery boxes as well, which are providing a public good. So it's showing lighting at night. There's no other streetlights, of course. And this had lots of issues. If you're walking around at night, there could be all sorts of hazards. Happy to go into them in a bit more detail, but essentially, when you put up public lighting like this, it's good intentions, but you can see on the right, if anyone has an engineering background, which you probably might, you can see some issues. So there's shading from the trees, solar panels are pointing in different directions, they don't look particularly clean. So it's a technology that's been implemented, but there's a few challenges, you could say, when it gets on the ground that still need to be sorted. This is somewhat what Liya was saying about where you need really clear guidelines for people on the ground about how to install these kind of technologies to make sure they're used to their full potential. Next slide, please. So we should talk a bit about challenges and opportunities. If you could skip ahead as well. Thanks. So I've deliberately done some bad slide design and just thrown all the thrown everything at you all at once, so that for those of you watching on the recording, you can pause this and you can go through them, but to just pick a few out that are particularly relevant, and some that Liya's touched on already. Bear in mind that in these contexts, there's often very limited infrastructure. People are generally reliant on very low levels of energy access. So both in terms of the power that you can get from a device. So for example, solar home systems are very common or more common in these kind of contexts, but obviously have a very low power output. So if you're going to have an appliance or a device that's going to run off a solar home system, it has to be very low power. There might also be issues around the variability of weather or the variability of energy day to day. In many places, there's issues around space availability. If you're in a very densely populated situation, and bear in mind there's lots of safety concerns you should be aware of. So in those kind of environments, you generally need to make sure that whatever you're designing is inherently safe and you can't accidentally hurt yourself or, God forbid, electrocute yourself or anything like that from what you're designing. Typically, these things need to be very robust in that people might want to move them around their area, and need to kind of survive a bit of abuse every now and again, just because, you know, if something's being used every day, it needs to be quite robust and, you know, have long supply chains for repair and maintenance. As Liya touched upon, in general, people have relatively low purchasing power. They might have variable incomes between months, or there might be differences in spending power between different groups within a single humanitarian context. There could be people from lots of different places or that have been in that area for different amounts of time, which can affect like essentially spending power between different segments of those communities. In general, these appliances have longer payback times or high upfront costs, or both. So thinking about how you can reduce the cost of an appliance, but also how you can show its value over a long period of time in order to kind of get that traction and make people use it for a long time, rather than just something that has a benefit for 6 months and then breaks, like the example that Liya gave. There's a few other issues around kind of donation models versus market-based models. A bit of a further consideration, but in general, where in humanitarian settings, people often receive basic needs items for free from humanitarian organizations because they have, you know, they have these needs. There's a big push towards how can we do this led by the private sector. So amongst those things, making things as cheap as possible is really good. People have different needs from different communities. Sorry, Sean, that was a natural pause. I'll spin through the last few. People have different needs from different communities. So think about how people make decisions in households. So for example, often it is the man of the house that makes decisions around purchasing items, for example, but it is the woman of the house that has most of the responsibilities towards cooking. So if you're designing a new efficient cooking appliance, you might consider both members of households in order to make that appliance something that people would want to buy. Engaging with the community is always a big plus. I imagine that's out of the scope of this challenge, but think about if you were to do this in practice, how you would engage with the local community to make sure that whatever you're designing meets their needs, and how you can tweak your design maybe afterwards to make sure it can accommodate those specific needs. And then finally, some logistical challenges. As Liya said, often these places are in very remote locations, very long supply chains. You might have a lack of local materials to fix or repair or maintain your appliance. Please do think about how you might be able to recycle the appliance or components of it after the end of its life, even if that might be a, you know, hopefully a long life, but 5 years down the line, maybe batteries need to be replaced, maybe pieces of the equipment need to be replaced. How might you go about recycling or reusing or otherwise disposing of those things? And also, it's always fun to see how different organizations collaborate together. So if you're coming in with an appliance, would you want this appliance to be shared with the world through an NGO that wants to have some kind of social benefit? Would you want it through a private sector company that wants to have essentially a profit-based model? Would it be something else? How do you have different organizations work together? I think if you can think about those kind of things, or having different organizations doing different parts, that could be a really good way to think about how your how your design might be implemented in practice. There you go, Sean, that's the end of that. So to summarize, there's a huge need. So there's a huge market across displacement context. There's many millions of people that are affected by these issues. Unfortunately, that is probably not going to change for a while, but it means that there is a huge potential for any designs that you come up with. There's a huge demand for energy in these settings, and different appliances that can use energy and provide increased energy services. And also fundamentally, there's a really high potential for new and innovative ideas. We're seeing some of this come through now in that, the kind of traditional models of giving away solar lanterns isn't really working, and people want to try new ideas that might have really big impact. So now is an excellent time to be designing these kind of things, because they will actually be taken up in practice rather than just being an academic exercise. Next, please. So the two things that I'll kind of end on, because it makes me feel a bit bad giving you all the challenges and then not giving too many tangible examples of opportunities. The two I wanted to draw out, one is electric cooking. So this is an example of an electric cooking program that was rolled out in Kakuma in Kenya. You can see the silver boxes on the left are electric pressure cookers. We see a huge impact or potential impact for these kind of appliances in displacement contexts, especially if they are low energy. They use a low amount of energy for a long period of time. How can you deal with that kind of challenge? But if you can deal with that, you'd have a huge impact, because many of the foods that people want to eat in these kind of contexts, especially in the Eastern African region, would save so much energy if you could slow cook them in a pressure cooker versus using firewood. The other example is the lady on the right is using a refrigerator. So having any kind of cold chain appliances to help either local produce that's being produced that then can be stored and then shipped to other places in order to increase its value to those people that grew it, or the other way around, having items that are brought in but then have a longer shelf life could also have a huge benefit. So just two examples. One of them is electricity for cooking and appliances related to that. The other is cold chain, energy for the cold chain, and how you can use that. So I think that's my final slide. Let's see. There we go. I would like to point out, and I'll put a link in the chat, we've just produced 3 reports all about East Africa, focusing on Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda that are available now. In there, there's lots of information you can find all about these 3 specific contexts. There's some stuff about efficient appliances in those reports, but they'll be really good if you want a general overview of those 3 contexts. So I'll find the link and I'll put it in the chat for you. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Philip. And thanks for putting all of those materials on the slide, because I do think that most people will probably be watching this in the recording. And I'll put those same links in the CrowdSolve post. You'll be able to find those there. So just head back to the CrowdSolve post and find them there if you don't have access to the chat. Okay. So I think that brings us, let's check, to the Q&A. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand, or just come off mute. I'm happy to deal with them that way. But while those are rolling in, I'll ask a few of my own questions. But yeah, I do encourage you to ask some questions, kind of like very personal to you and your design, and don't worry if it's very specific to your team. This is kind of the forum for that. So let me just stop sharing my screen and we can start answering some questions. While we're getting those in, my first one, I think Philip will probably be answering most of the questions today, if that's okay. Especially because Liya's got that sore throat. But the first one is, what makes humanitarian contexts an interesting or exciting context to design for, do you think, Philip? I know you mentioned some of those opportunities, but
yeah, I don't want to dominate the discussion, sorry, Liya, like maybe you should jump in, but I'll take this one first as I just shut my blind. Sorry. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting context because I came from the kind of more traditional energy access or world of energy access, and then have moved into this humanitarian context, and there's a huge number of parallels between those 2 issues in that people's needs are generally very similar. Generally, people have very low access to energy. Generally, people need energy for cooking. There's lots of really interesting designs for like different kind of energy services, again, trying to keep it nice and broad. But I think what makes humanitarian settings in particular really interesting is that they've not really had that much focus on until about maybe 5 or 10 years ago, let's say 10 years ago. So whereas lots of programs have been rolled out in many different countries that focused on essentially their national population, a lot of displacement settings were left behind because they were left out of different policies for lots of different reasons. Yeah, but now, thankfully, they're now sort of being brought into these other policies, which means there's going to be a huge period of growth because everything's been left behind and everyone's trying to catch up right now. So this is really a very nascent world, a nascent industry. Sounds a bit strange calling it an industry, but it's only really been kicking off in the past 10 years, which means there's a huge amount of ground that needs to be caught up, and a huge amount of innovation that's possible in these kind of areas. It's another example of like the leapfrogging effect of you kind of miss out on all the solutions that worked a little bit and are kind of old-fashioned by now, and now actually, because there's these opportunities now, you can go straight in at the most innovative levels. The other thing that makes it really interesting is that you have all kinds of people that unfortunately find themselves in these kind of situations. So you have people from all kinds of different backgrounds that have for one reason or another been forced to move to let's say a refugee camp, which means that when you come along with really innovative solutions, you have lots of different people that can help you grow your idea in that place. So the example that I keep going back to in Kakuma is when companies were trying to roll out these kind of innovations, they found that actually it was much easier to hire staff in those areas because people had come from all walks of life and they were looking for opportunities, that because there's just so few opportunities, that when it came to starting a business or finding a managing director of a mini grid company, you have this kind of expertise in the camp, whereas you maybe wouldn't have that in, for example, a rural area of the same country. Finally, the interesting thing is how different organizations can scale growth. So in my experience, in a lot of the kind of more traditional energy access areas, this is either kind of government-led or it's relatively small scale, like private sector led. In a humanitarian setting, depending on the country, you have different organizations that can all be leaders in this kind of thing. So you can approach from lots of different angles to achieve the same kind of goals. So the example I was giving earlier about how you get different organizations to work together, if you had a really cool design, you could think about how do you want to implement this in practice? Can you do it through a private sector model? In certain places, yeah, sure, that might be the best. In other places, you could do it through a more traditional like NGO or humanitarian route, or you could do a combination of a few of them, which I feel like a lot of these issues are really brought up to 100 when you're working in a humanitarian context, whereas in other contexts, it can be a little bit tricky, maybe there's a bit more inertia, but right now there's so much of a focus on this issue. It's a really cool time to be designing stuff for these kind of settings.
And I think Philip kind of touched on that in last year's webinar as well, kind of this collaboration, like organizations not working in silo within the humanitarian context, which I think is something that you can really think of and take advantage of in your design process, especially when you're thinking of scalability. And as Philip says, there's a lot of room for innovation and development, not only within that innovation space that you're thinking of throughout the challenge, but social impact, scalability, sustainability. As Philip mentioned, the main way that people are powering appliances within these contexts right now is diesel generators, which is very harmful for the environment. And I think what Philip was just mentioning, there's a lot of people within these settings. I think UNOCHA said 339 million people would need humanitarian assistance this year, and over 1% of the population is displaced. So I think there's a lot of room for all of you to work here, and a lot of need for that work. Abdulaziz, do you want to ask your question? I see your hand is raised. Thanks for that.
Yes. Hi, Sean, Rachel, Liya, Phillips. Thanks for such a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. It was quite impactful. But I would like to ask a question. When designing for humanitarian context, is there some sort of factor you put into consideration, like a backup plan or something? Depending on the, when we talk about humanitarian, you're talking about something people need regularly, something that improves the quality of lives of people, right? These are things people need on a daily basis, right? And when you're designing such a DC appliances, which depends on solar for its power, you have to consider, is there some sort of consideration when you put in the factor the geographical location, country, region, or something? Because some countries do have more rainfall than other countries, you see. So when you're having such a design that where some countries have 9 to 10 month rainfall consistently, is there some sort of backup plan? Because when you design in such a country or such a region, it won't be as effective, or it won't perform its function as it should compared to a region that has high sunshine or peak sunshine almost throughout the year. So is there some sort of backup plan in such a context to make sure they continue utilizing this particular solar design to ensure its longevity? Yeah.
Thanks, Abdulaziz. And I think both of you kind of touched on reliability, but who would like to take that question? Liya, do you feel up to answering questions today? No. Go ahead, Philip, if you can.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, jump in if you'd like, but I'm happy to field this. Thanks, Abdulaziz. That's a really good question. Yeah, because as you very correctly point out, if you're designing something that is essentially weather dependent because it's based on solar, obviously there's lots of different types of weather around the world. So designing for one context might not be appropriate for designing a different context. So my advice here would be that when it comes to designing your design, I would say it's best to focus on a relatively specific location in the first instance. Sean, actually, this may be me second guessing the criteria of the design challenge, so please interrupt me if not. But I would say if you are thinking of a specific design, then I would suggest that you kind of select a location for it. So we mentioned a few times, and I'll mention again, this a place called Kakuma in Kenya. It has featured a lot of it's received a lot of publicity in terms of energy and refugee settings, and so I'll just continue there. If you're designing something for that kind of region, it's in the north of Kenya. There's lots of sun throughout the year, hardly any rain. So if you're designing an appliance there, I think if you would, if you wanted to do that and you wanted to focus on that location, I'd encourage you to kind of like lock in there and then say like, okay, I'm going to design a really good intervention for this area. And then once you've done that, you can kind of follow along and say like, it's good for this, people in this camp because they come from these kind of backgrounds, or they have these kind of needs or these interests, and you kind of focus on, again, like the Kakuma area for now. But I would also say that once you kind of do that design, at kind of the end almost of that process, you could think about how it can be scaled to other kind of locations as well. So I'd say in the first instance, focus on one location, but also consider how it could be extended to, let's say, the south of Kenya, where generally speaking, the conditions are relatively similar, or whatever, some other countries with similar conditions. But it's always really important to know your limitations. So exactly as you've said, if you're designing something for Kakuma in Kenya and you move it to, let's say, somewhere like you said that has like a long rainy period, for example, you could say like, okay, this is going to be a limitation of this appliance in this area. Maybe you would say, here's how I would tweak the design. Maybe if it's something solar powered, you add an extra panel to accommodate that. But Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably best to focus on one area well, do that right, and then say, okay, here's how I would change it for a future place. Here's a limitation, things like that.
Yeah, you got it
Thank you
right.
very much.
Thanks, Abdulaziz. Thanks for the question. And Philip is right. And you hear it from every one of our webinar speakers, kind of know your context and your problem statement very well. And part of that is considering a very specific problem statement, something that you're designing a solution for. And then once you kind of design that well for that situation, you can think of how different elements can be transferable to other contexts, especially when you're considering scalability. Consider how adaptations can be made to the design to be placed into different contexts. And one thing that I think you should really take away from what Philip is saying there is recognize your limitations. So don't just kind of like tuck those under the rug. Just make sure that people know that you know what those limitations are and how users or the designers can overcome them, how they can be transferable, etc. Thanks, Philip. Keep the questions coming in. And I think, and Rachel, feel free to jump in with questions as well if you like. And I wanted to ask, what separates humanitarian context from other off-grid settings? So what barriers do you think exist for displaced people, for example, from adopting non-specific off-grid solutions? And I think you both touched on this in your designs quite deeply, but if you could give some like key points of just to sum them up.
Right, I'll go again. I'll use the example of like, let's say that just imagine a humanitarian context that is in a remote area of a developing country, and there's the let's say refugee population, and then there's the local population as well. Like, what's the difference between addressing those two needs? In some ways, there's not a lot of difference in that, a person living on one side of that boundary, it probably has very similar needs to the person on the other side. It's like, unsurprisingly, like people have very similar needs wherever you go, and people that live next to each other generally have the same needs. There's difference in how these are addressed. So some of these are political or like legislative. So there can be very different policies between, for example, energy access program for someone in a village next to a refugee camp versus what's allowed in a refugee camp. There are lots of essentially discriminatory policies which limit limit the kind of like rights and availability of different things for refugee populations versus their host communities. Some of these are more procedural. So, for example, in some contexts, it can be difficult for companies to have access to refugee camps because they need to go through some long administrative processes to get approval to be able to enter or to work in those contexts. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And sometimes there's kind of differences in the communities. You know, if people have come a relatively short distance across a border, for example, the needs of those communities are relatively similar, but sometimes people have come much longer distances and there might be different cultural preferences. So, for example, in let's say in like in Kenya, for example, again, there's kind of different people have come from lots of different places, whether it's from Democratic Republic of Congo or Somalia, for example, those two groups, but we have very different interests or kind of community needs for electricity. Many similar, but some can be quite different. So in that way, these settings can be quite different and make quite an interesting challenge. I think there are lots of barriers. The good thing is that mostly the kind of political push is to more integration of displaced people. So with a few kind of notable exceptions, most countries are moving to greater integration of refugee populations. So these barriers are now being broken down. So things are really good. It means things are opening up. And it means that this need that's kind of been pent up is now finally being met, which is great. On the other side of this, there are kind of like big enablers as well. So a lot of NGOs and a lot of UN organizations focus solely on displaced populations. So for example, UNHCR, which is the main refugee agency, will have programs that specifically target refugee populations because that's in their mandate. It's the kind of the remit of their work. So if you can kind of tap into them, they are a huge organization. And if you want to do something at scale that reaches 10,000 people, and you can get UNHCR on board and happy to work with you, you can actually go from reaching 0 people to reaching 10,000 people really quickly, and much quicker than if you were to do the same thing in 100 villages all around that area. The thing I'll leave on is that most of the time nowadays, and this is something that we, the GPA, massively support, is not just targeting one group or the other. So when it comes to, we try and be quite inclusive when we say displacement context, and that can mean the people that are affected by displacements, the person that's had to move from one place to another, but also the community that they've moved next to or moved alongside or moved into. So if you were developing an appliance, hopefully it would have broad appeal to both people that have been displaced, but also the people that have been living there for much longer, and that can meet both of their needs. You could double your market size, if nothing else. But also, try and be inclusive rather than just focusing on, someone who lives on one side of the camp boundary, also the other, because we don't want to move from having the problems in one direction and having the problems in the other again. So if you can kind of include everyone, that would be excellent.
Thanks, Philip, and thanks for kind of highlighting what makes this context special for anyone considering designing and maybe thinking like, oh yeah, maybe I can just tack humanitarian context onto the usage of my appliance, and there are things that separate it from other off-grid settings. I wanted to ask, maybe Liya, you can type this in the chat, and Philip, you can answer over mic. Especially Liya, because I know you're researching from a distance. I wanted to ask, often students are designing for a local problem statement. So what resources are available for a team to approach humanitarian settings with that same level of understanding? Where can they go to find out key information, and what can they trust?
Sure. Yeah, to answer your last question first, in terms of trustworthiness of data, this is normally not a problem. Like, yeah, in general, lots of resources, they're all very frank, they're all very good essentially at spelling out how big the problem is and not really overselling things. So yeah, in terms of the resources you find, they're normally very good. The problem is there's not very many. So of course the first thing I advertise is the GPA's own work. So I put a link in the chat to some recent work that I've been involved with, which is all about focusing on different countries, like one by one. So if you are interested in any of those contexts, I definitely encourage you to read those. We have a few other programs around the GPA, which are focusing on different elements of energy access. One is focused on inclusion specifically. So how do you involve local communities in all aspects of energy and displacement settings, but also in terms of designing these kind of solutions. There's a decent amount of academic literature on this side of things. Some of it is kind of more theoretical rather than practical, or they have a few kind of case studies that you can look at. So I'd encourage you to look at those because they spell things out in very clear, well, in a lot of detail about the kind of best practice of this. And I'm sure that's probably well beyond what you can be able to do as part of this challenge, but it's a good idea to get some ideas about how to address some of these issues, or especially just to say, like, if you were to take this forward, how you would do it in the future. You know, things like how do you do like a good community consultation? What do you do after that? How do you tweak your design? Like things like that. We're very well covered. There's a website which has a lot of resources on humanitarian energy, which is called Energypedia. It's the website itself is broad, all about energy access issues, but they have quite a lot, actually like a lot of humanitarian focused resources. So yeah, Energypedia is a really good resource to have. Aside from that, I would say once you've focused on a specific context, so let's say you want to focus on, let's say Uganda, because we keep using other examples. Let's say you want to focus on users in Uganda. I would definitely encourage you to look up the organizations that are working in that setting. So some of these will be like kind of large development actors. So like, for example, like GIZ, the German Development Agency, they have a lot of energy access projects and they normally are quite good at putting out reports about what they've done. Focus on, if you can, like local NGOs, because typically they're the ones in the field actually doing things and they have the best knowledge. It can be a bit hit and miss if you can actually find resources from them, but when you do, they're normally really, really good. Yeah, and then finally, I'd encourage you to kind of look at what other companies are doing, or like what companies are doing in terms of what appliances are already out there. You know, just being able to understand like what kind of appliances have been used in other contexts, thinking about how they might be transferable, and also what kind of issues you might have from that transfer. Because sometimes appliances work great in some other location. They just, you know, it's just such a new area. People haven't gotten around to doing it somewhere else yet. In other cases, actually, there's some reason which you might not be able to do it, like the example that was given earlier about the weather conditions. Maybe it's not appropriate. So there is information out there. It can be hard to find. I encourage you not to self-promote, but to go on the GPA's website. Just, it's a good starting point, and we do our best to point to other resources that are available. So I'd encourage you to start there, especially if you're interested in one of the countries that we've looked at. But there's a lot of good stuff out there, and definitely check out Energypedia. It's super accessible, and there's reports on lots of different things hosted there.
Thanks, Philip. And I'll put the links that you mentioned on the crowdsource post for everyone. Sorry, Rachel, just to butt in, but there is, it's actually energypedia.info, not energypedia.com. That's the one connected to humanitarian energy projects, so you can check that page out. And I'll also share like the GPA website as well on the crowdsource post, so you can find all of those on there. Liya says, for our research, we relied on GPA reports, RE4R reports, IRENE reports, UNHCR reports, and like Philip mentioned, these resources are highly reliable and accurate. Make sure to access latest publications for updated figures. Similar to our last webinar on research, consider the publication date because things move quickly, especially in spaces where there's lots of innovation going on. So consider resources post-2019, for example. Okay, and just before I move on to the next question, Kartikeyan asked if we can upload the recording and the slides, and don't worry, those will be available on crowdsource as we mentioned. Okay, so we have a few minutes left, but I was hoping to ask maybe one or two questions before we go. Maybe just quick fire. I know you've been speaking a lot, Philip, so sorry to ask more questions, but there's a few things I wanted to make sure the students know. One is, you touched on this briefly with the UN, but how can a team deploy technology in displacement camp, for example, if they're going to write about this? So what is the best kind of market access point for technology?
Cool. The short answer is it depends on the country. So I'll give the two kind of extreme examples. So one is if you were going to if you're going to work in a humanitarian setting, in some countries that are very welcoming to refugees, it is almost exactly the same as working in any other context in that country. So if you're going to do it in practice, you'd probably have to register a company, set up things, and then go and sell. You could sell in Kakuma refugee camp, very similar to Kakuma town, which is next to it. A bit of an oversimplification. You'd probably still want to get the consent of UNHCR, kind of make them aware that you're doing things, but mostly they wouldn't object. So you'd kind of need to be more of an information sharing rather than explicit permissions, trying to gain permissions. You'd also definitely want to inform the local community. So worth highlighting that there's lots of community structures in place. So for example, in most settings, you have some kind of like camp or setting like executive committee of people that are elected by people that live there and want to represent the views or the needs of refugees, for example. So if I was going to start working in some refugee camp, I'd probably find out who's in charge of the refugee committee and the leader of that, to make sure that they're aware of what I'm doing and hopefully get their interest, and hopefully they'll support you in doing it. The other extreme example is where camps are relatively more closed, in which case you need to go through a lot more formal permissions. So in that case, you would need approval from UNHCR or maybe IOM, whoever's running the, let's say, refugee camp at this point, in order to get more explicit permissions. This can be quite time consuming. It generally means that it's a lot longer process, but once you get through that process, it's normally the most rewarding, because generally fewer organizations have gone through that process. And therefore the need is greater by the time you eventually reach your destination. Other kind of entry points would include working with an NGO that's already working in those contexts. This would apply on both examples that I gave. So if some organizations are already doing some kind of NG work, you could consider partnering with them to kind of piggyback on their access, their local knowledge, their connections, in order to kind of get your idea off the ground as fast as possible.
Thanks, Philip. Great takeaways for people and things to consider when you're doing that kind of section of your report, and considering how you can kind of take your design beyond the challenge and further when it's more kind of market ready. Okay, we're at 11 o'clock now, and I don't want to keep our speakers longer. So thank you very much for joining today, Philip and Liya. Kind of wealth of knowledge here, so it's been really helpful having you here to answer questions and go through your presentations. If you are interested in humanitarian contexts, please feel free to send questions post webinar if you're watching the recording, and please check out last year's webinar with Philip. So that's online. That was another great presentation, joined by his colleague Joelle, who also had a great wealth of knowledge about the subject, which was really great to have her as well. Okay, but I can let you two go. Feel free to drop off if you want. I'll just go through the final things with the students, kind of next steps. So right now you should be signing up your terms and conditions, so you get these emails, create your project space, add all your teammates, and finally upload your concept note. Hopefully you kind of consider humanitarian contexts if you're thinking of your design now. And with that, I wanted to launch our final poll and see if we kind of change those no's. Let me just share the results of the last one. You can see we had 2 no's. And our end line, here you go. And you can fill that webinar, that poll out while I go through the next steps. So your concept note will be reviewed. So it should be with you within a month of us receiving your concept note. Although over the kind of holiday period, this might slow down a little bit. So please bear with us. As you can see from the last point here, the team is on leave fully from 23 December to 1st January, but a few people will be kind of dropping in and out over that time. Once you do submit your concept note, though, your mentor will be tagged and your review will be tagged on the post. They'll also email you following that, and hopefully your mentor is able to help you through all of those kind of questions that come up through that review process. On 12 December, which is tomorrow, I believe, we're opening our prototyping window 1. So if you are interested in prototyping this year, do apply to that. You should have all of the information and resources available to you already. Please reach out if you have any questions. I encourage you all to apply to that opportunity. I think it closes 12th January, so we have this holiday period, this winter period to apply to that. 19 December, our second drop-in session is happening. It's going to be a joint session with me and Ella, who's coordinating the prototypes this year. So come if you have any questions about the design or you have any questions about the prototyping opportunity. So we'll be there to answer any and all questions. And then finally, I just want to mention that on 11 March, we will have this Choose Your Own webinar. So I want you to think about some topics that you might be interested in learning about before 1 month before that final submission is due, anything that you feel like won't be covered. So you on CrowdSolve under the event space, you'll see all of the events for this year. You can see all the webinars that we'll be covering. We have 5 thematic webinars this year and a few other workshops. Think about what may be missing for you particularly and send in your suggestions. I'll set up a little a forum space, a space for you to feed that information in there. Okay, so looks like everyone's done the poll and we have moved from the 2 no's have moved to yes, but not as our primary end user. So considering it within your designs, and our yeses remain yeses. That's good news as well. Okay, just while we're closing up, please remember to complete the feedback survey. Make sure that we know if we're missing anything, if you have any improvements for our webinars, and hopefully those are in place by the next time we have a webinar, which will be in January. I think Rachel will be hosting that time, hopefully. And yeah, leave that for 1 second. Sign your T's and C's. I think most people that are here probably signed your terms and conditions. This makes sure that you receive any updates from us, receive our webinars, invites, receive information on the challenge. This is essential to the start of your challenge process. And finally, the newsletter sign up. So we just had a newsletter go out last week. You'll find that on CrowdSolve now, but please sign up to this and you'll get good information about the sector, information about what's happening on the challenge, some stories. I think those are really important to all of you and they come out quarterly, so it won't fill up your inbox too much. Okay, and that will close out the session. Sorry for keeping you 5 minutes over, but I hope you enjoyed it and see you all in the new year, I guess, if you don't see me at the drop-in. Thanks again, Philip and Liya. It was really great to have you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.